Okay, welcome everyone to the Partnership for Public Service. I'm very excited about this event. Welcome to those that are here in person and for those that are participating online. This is an event that we are doing with our great partners at Deloitte. We've had a long-standing relationship with Deloitte many years. I think we're now talking decades of working together to help make the federal government work more effectively. This event is specifically organized with the Center for Presidential Transition of the partnership. Summary of the Partnership for Public Service. We are a nonpartisan nonprofit organization that is focused on making our government work more effectively. And one element of that, we believe, is not just a peaceful, but a effective handoff of power. We started 16 years ago, the Center for Presidential Transition, realizing that up until that point, transitions had essentially been Groundhog Day exercises. Every cycle, every 4 years, a new set of folks would come together to try to figure out, usually too late in the day, how to effectively take over the federal government. And in doing so, they put us at risk. One of the things that we saw very clearly was that the transition is the moment of maximum vulnerability for our country. And that was something that we had to change. So over the past 16 years, the center has been involved really at two levels. One, trying to figure out operationally how to help teams, and that includes both challengers as well as incumbents and the career workforce more effectively prepare for the handoff of power or the second administration of an administration. And we've also been focusing, trying to work with Congress on how to improve the actual process itself. So issues like the number of Senate confirmed positions being an example of that. We are very excited to be able to take on this topic. One of the fundamental ways in which our federal government actually has impact is not alone, but working with state and local government. That intergovernmental function is absolutely critical. I think in the last few years, we're seeing this more and more with some of the major investments that the federal government has committed to, such as the bipartisan infrastructure law or IRA or the CHIPS Act that goes on and on and on. One of the things that we are focused on, just as we were with the learning system around the Center for Presidential Transition, is to think about a learning system around these major investments. How do we learn how to do that better and better? And plainly, the relationship between the federal, state, and local government is a core element of that. So without further ado, because you've now just learned everything that I know, you now get to hear from a set of real experts, people who are in the arena and doing incredible work. We have a wonderful panel and again, I heard the governor ask the senator governor how she would like to be referred to, but she is both senator and former governor in New Hampshire, and we have the former governor of Maryland here as well. I'm looking forward to this conversation. It will be moderated by Valerie, who is our head of our Center for Presidential Transition. And I want to reiterate, none of this work would have been possible without the incredible partnership of Deloitte. And with that, I get to hand this off to Heidi Green, who is the Managing Director for Government Relations and Policy and a wonderful partner. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Max. Thank you. Well, we have been just delighted to cooperate with the partnership on this. Senator and Governor, thank you so much for being here today. We're excited about this conversation. Deloitte Consulting actually really was very interested in participating with the partnership on this. We do work in about 48 states across the country, including Maryland and New Hampshire. And we also do work in every federal agency. So we care a lot about intergovernmental affairs and that cooperation between state, local governments and the federal government. I was thinking about this report and what it says. I have an 8th grader. And so he last week was beginning to talk about the Constitution. And I'm like, yeah, this is a mom moment. I'm right here. I like dive in for 20 minutes, about states' rights and the federal government and how it all works together. You all look much more interested than he did. I'm just going to say right now. But this is definitely a passion that we have at Deloitte to foster good government. And this report talks about some of the fundamentals of how a presidential transition can lay the foundation for really making that transition successful in the intergovernmental realm. And so there were, really 3 foundational points that we made. And you're going to think, oh, those sound really logical, kind of duh, right? That's a very technical term right there, the duh piece. But it actually doesn't always work this way. And we talked to professionals across 4 presidential administrations. We talked to professionals at every level. We talked to the Big 7, the associations. I appreciate Leanne's here with National Governors Association, really to get their insights about what do we really need to have in terms of really fostering really good cooperation at the federal, state, and local level. And when I say local, I also want to include tribal and territorial. So 3 points that we want you to take away as we release the States of the Union. I love that title. First of all, initiate relationships early. It's really important as transitions are coming in. You can imagine how many stakeholders they have and the number of people that want their attention, but it's very important that they begin to build those relationships early with governors, with local officials, because let's just say you can't plan for a crisis, right? And we, both of these governors can talk about the amounts of crises that they had to deal with and the number of cooperation that is required at the federal level. We also want to prioritize diverse experiences, right? So White House personnel has to fill a lot of roles, and making sure that they're filling some of those roles with people who have experience at the state and local levels, so that they really, as you're doing the implementation of these programs, you understand how the nuts and bolts work. And then the third piece, I love, foster connections for impact. What does that mean? Sounds very consultancy. It means, right, that you have to build relationships not within just OIG, but that OIG has to have influence and really drive that relationship building across agencies. Because at the end of the day, most of the federal government programs are implemented at the state and local level by state and local partners. So this is about partnership, which makes it perfect for us to be here. we're going to release the study today, which we're super excited about. We hope that you will take a look at it. But in the meantime, we're going to hear from the experts who have lived this. And so Valerie, who is the director of the Center for Presidential Transitions, is going to moderate and bring up the panel. Thank you.
Stay on the end, and is that okay? It'll look good between the two of us.
I'm a thorn between two roses.
Well, I was excited about many things about this agenda, starting with following Heidi Green, who brings light and energy and experience to every room. So thank you for that great introduction to the report. And I was particularly excited to be able to be on stage with two luminary public servants who are known for working across the aisle to achieve big things. I know that it's never fun to start an event with long recitations of bios. However, I think it's important to set the context for some of the achievements of these two exceptional individuals, and why they're the perfect people to have this conversation with us today. So I'll go in alphabetical order and start with Governor Hogan, who was the first Republican governor in 50 years in Maryland, and started with a $5 billion deficit and turned it around at the end to $5 billion in reserves. We talk a lot about financial management and government in this organization, so we should have a separate conversation about how you did that someday. And you're known for your work across the aisle and achieving big things. Senator Shaheen was governor of New Hampshire 3 times, the first woman to be elected both governor and senator, which is a little bit remarkable, actually, that we're at that point in our history. But we're so grateful that you're here. You're known for setting up bipartisan coalitions on tough issues. And so I think we could start at the beginning here at the center, as Heidi and Max said, we help presidential candidates get ready to govern. And campaign promises are easy. Implementing them, the details are hard. And as Heidi said, it's all about state and local partnerships, tribal and territorial, to get the details right. So let's start at the beginning. If I could ask you both to talk about how an incoming White House team can build trust with state and local officials. What does it take to start off on the right foot?
Well, I think starting by recognizing that once the campaign is over, that you're really serving all the people in the country. And I think the inclination is often to reach out first to people in your own party, and that what it's really important to do is to reach out to everybody, and to reach out both at the state and local level. I remember when I got elected governor and was putting together my transition team, I tried very hard to have a Republican and a Democrat co-chair it, because I thought it was important to send that message early on that this is going to be an effort to serve everybody. And it's really important for the president to do that.
Yeah, I'll agree with you, Senator. That's it's really critically important. And I didn't realize that about you when you first became governor. I did the same when we came in. I had two co-chairs of our transition team. It was a Democrat and a Republican, and people had served in previous transition teams and previous administrations. And you know, it's critically important that you're working together to take over the reins of government, whether it's at the state level or at the federal level. The politics is sort of over at that point. You know, the campaigns are done. This is much more serious, and there are ongoing problems and issues that need to be dealt with. So a presidential team comes in. It's a really difficult time. There's a lot to be done, bringing in the whole new team. So you're looking at a whole new White House staff, a whole new cabinet, all these other thousands of people. And while they're not yet, you know, they only have their sea legs yet. They don't know how to find the restroom or where their desk is. And yet the country is dealing with all kinds of issues. And so I think it's so important to have that communication, particularly not only with the federal agencies and with the outgoing administration, but also with the state and local officials who are used to dealing with one administration and talking to those folks every day. And all of a sudden it's cut off and changed. And we can provide a lot of input from the states and the local governments to them about what's going on, because sometimes they're not getting all the information that they need from the outgoing administration.
So you talked about people coming in and not knowing where the bathroom is, and we talked to a lot of people who when you're arriving at the White House, your computer is bare. Presidential Records Act says everything has to be out of there, and a lot of people talked about just not having a contact list to get started with, to know who to talk to. So it might be a good segue to mention Governor Hogan was chairman of the National Governors Association. Could you each talk to us a little about the role that associations play in helping to make connections between a new administration and what's really been happening in the country?
Sure, I think it's critically important. I was really honored to be the chairman of the National Governors Association. It was, you know, there were two things that were really important, and they were happening around transitions. One was, I picked the chair's initiative to focus on rebuilding America's infrastructure, which we did summits around the country and a couple internationally. We got all the best input, and we got all 50 governors to agree on a set of principles on what we should be doing to rebuild our infrastructure, which should be included and shouldn't be included. We're working with the outgoing administration to try to get something done. I mean, this is an issue that all Democrats and Republicans say is critically important, but the things changed, and the new administration came in, and we immediately sat down with them and tried to tell them all the things we wanted in an infrastructure bill. And then, you know, when it got off track, and it really does involve the states are the ones building all the infrastructure, state and local governments. And so while the senator and her colleagues in the Senate and the House, they were trying to figure out this bill, and it was a little bit off track because Republicans only wanted the roads and bridges and about $400 billion, and the Democrats wanted another $4 trillion of other things that we didn't think was infrastructure. And so I actually, with the help of the NGA, brought together and had a summit at the, we called it the Annapolis Summit, at the governor's mansion in Annapolis. I brought Democratic and Republican governors, senators, and congressmen to come in together to hammer out an agreement and a compromise, which became the basis of the final bill. The other thing that while I was chairman of the Governors Association was we were battling with COVID. And so governors who normally, you always have some role in whatever crisis or emergency, but the governors were on the front line. Governors were required to, we had people dying, we had hospitals overflowing. We were the ones pushing the federal government to get the things that we needed. And then the administration changed. So, I led between just calls with governors and then calls with the president, vice president, all the cabinet, coronavirus cabinet, 50 some different Zooms with governors across the country and with all the players. And then we had a new administration coming in. And I don't know all the details of it, but it didn't seem as if the outgoing administration really got the incoming administration up to speed. We reached out to the incoming.
Yeah, especially since they tried to overthrow the new government.
Well,
I mean,
yeah, that's another
was-
part, probably. Yeah.
yeah.
But so the governors actually sat down. Jeff Zients called me when he first got the job. He was going to head up the thing for the Biden administration. And he and I talked for hours about, we had to tell him, here's what we've been doing for the past year, and here's how it works, and here's what the governors are up to. And we encouraged him to continue these discussions with the president and vice president and their top team with all of the governors who were out on the front lines. And so I also was pushing the outgoing administration and talking to Vice President Pence about how critically important that lives were at stake. It was the worst global pandemic in 100 years. And the fact that the president was not cooperating on the way out, that I thought it was important for the vice president who headed the coronavirus task force to provide everything they possibly could to the incoming administration.
And I think that was really helpful, and your willingness to reach across the aisle, I think, was very helpful. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough people who were willing to do that in the Trump administration. And we saw in the last years that there was very little cooperation with the incoming administration. One of the things that most people who get elected president are people who have had some political experience and background. And so they have relationships that they bring with them. And they've often been governors, or they've been in the Senate or in public life in some way. So they know who those associations are, and reminding people that reaching out to them can provide valuable information. And as you point out, having support from governors has been really important, and thinking about how to engage them is critical. And one of the things that I think, having been a governor and now having been in the Senate, I think one of the criticisms that people often have is that whoever's in the administration doesn't reach out enough to whether it's the Governors Association or the mayors or whatever, because you're dealing with the operations of the country on a daily basis. And it's hard to remember that reaching out is really going to be helpful in terms of getting things done that you want to get done. And I think some administrations have done it much better than others.
Yeah, I think it's really important. You really are focused on putting the whole federal government together, appointees at every agency, building your team, your staff. We're doing the same thing at the state level. So we're coming in with a brand new, governor's staff and appointing people to every cabinet level position. And so we've been through it on a smaller scale, almost exactly what happens at the federal level. We're typically, the way the governor's races are in off years, not all, they come at different times, and you had to run every two years in New Hampshire. A tough thing to do, but most governors have been in for a couple of years by the time the president comes in. And we're trying, it's really on our side, we're like trying to figure out who to deal with. There's these ongoing crises and problems and issues that we deal with the federal team every day, and yet then they're all gone, and then the new people aren't in, right, and things start falling through the cracks. So it really is important to reach out to the nation's governors, and we do it with local governments on the other side, on the other way. And we're coming and taking over state, and we have to build the whole state government, but we're also reaching out to the counties and the municipalities to try to make sure that there's a seamless transfer and that there's great communication at all levels,
And it's
especially in a crisis.
well, that's right. And as Valerie said, so much of what's getting implemented is getting implemented at the state and local level. And so it's not just about reaching out to governors, but it's also recognizing that mayors, counties are really important in implementation. When we were passed the American Rescue Plan, one of the things we worked really hard to do is to make sure that the municipal association in New Hampshire, all of the counties in New Hampshire, that everybody knew what funding was there, what was available, and tried to get that out. And it was helpful to have information from the administration to tell us what's available and how people can apply for money and get questions answered. And so all of that's very important.
All the relief acts, during COVID, where all that was still in flux, new
Right.
people administering it. States were the ones that actually got the money in the hands of the right people. There was all kinds of problems with it at the federal level and fraud that was just beyond belief. And then we had a new team. So we sort of had to explain to them what was going on as well. Like our state identified this first, billions of dollars worth of fraud and took it to the labor IG, who then discovered it in every other state. And I think there was a story in the Post, I think today, it was about $185 billion in fraud. That went out of every $7 that went out. But that was another case of the states are saying to the feds, hey, here's what we're discovering with your money that we're administering, that there's a mess here.
You both touched on a point that we heard from so many people from the last 4 administrations, that it is helpful to hire people who've been in state and local government, because they not only have the trust and close relationships with important people around the country, but they also understand how the processes and the systems work. Did you see that in your experience? There were certain people you knew you could go to in an incoming administration, or was it a challenge when there wasn't somebody who could fill those shoes?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And having somebody who had been through it. So in the first term of the Obama administration, the person he had head up his intergovernmental office was somebody who had worked for the Senate. And so he not only continued to have relationships in the Senate, but he understood how the Senate worked. And so was much more responsive when somebody called him. And it matters, because people who have been there understand the challenges and can help work through those.
Yeah, I think it's critically important to get the right person with the right experience into the roles of intergovernmental. And sometimes various people have also put in governors or mayors or people that have that local government connection, because they understand the importance of the reaching out to the other, not just the branches of federal government, but to the states and to the territories and to the municipalities and the counties and all of the big 7. Some do it better than others, and some do it right away and get really organized, and some it takes a while before they get off the ground or find the right person. And in the meantime, a little does get, falls between the cracks. From our end, I'll hear our cabinet secretaries, or when are they going to get a cabinet secretary that we can deal with because we've got this issue, or deputy chiefs of staff are saying, or we can't get hold of anyone at the White House. It's understandable. It takes a while to get up to speed, but the more we can do to help them get up to speed faster, the better. And we deal with that at the state level too. We came in, I can tell you, I was governor through 3 presidents, so we dealt with 3 different administrations. I also saw what it was like on coming in as a new governor, the cooperation or lack thereof from the outgoing administration, and then what we did with the next governor and how much we cooperated. I think it's much better when you try to provide as much help and information. I put the lieutenant governor in charge. We had every single one of our cabinet members, and we did full briefings and briefing documents to make sure that the incoming governor knew every single thing that was happening in state government. When I came in as governor, it was like, see you later, out the door. Like, there's nothing on the computers, as you said. There's no files. Everything's in archives, and we're like saying, what's going on here? We have to put a budget together in a week, $60 billion budget, and take over a government with 90,000 employees.
And people watching think, oh, well, that's about partisanship. I can tell you, having been in the state Senate in New Hampshire, that we had a Republican governor who took over from another very notable Republican governor who faced the same thing. because it's not just about challenges working across the aisle, it's also about inter-party concerns. And so if we can get people to focus on the fact that it's better for everybody if we provide that transition, if we help from one administration to the next to make that transition that is going to make government work better. And Valerie, you talked about in a disaster and emergency, and the governor talked about COVID and what that was like. I was governor on 9/11, and I can tell you that for people when they're facing a disaster, whether it's a pandemic or a hurricane or 9/11, they want government to work, and they want to be able to see what they can count on. And so having that disaster planning is really critical. I have a story from the Bush administration, and we got along very well. I served as governor with President George W. Bush, and he was always very nice to me. But one of the things that happened in that administration was because we'd never faced a disaster like 9/11, the planning for how to deal with that was really challenging. And I can remember being on calls, I'm sure you've had this happen, where we were told there was a threat level. And so we'd get on the call and we'd ask what we needed to do to respond to that threat level. It's threat level orange. So we got to be careful. We got to watch what's going on. And there was no substance behind it. There were no details about what to watch for, what to do, how to plan for that. And that was really frustrating as a governor. We had, you may remember the Attorney General asked all of the U.S. attorneys throughout the country to get together, all the law enforcement officials to look out for terrorists in our states. And my attorney general called me after that meeting, and he said, it was really strange. We had all the right people there. We had the head of the state police, we had local law enforcement, we had our U.S. attorney, we had the attorney general he was there from the state. He said, and so they said, we want you to look out for these people because we're concerned that terrorists are infiltrating in the United States. And we said, okay, we're ready. We're going to do that. So give us the list. Well, no, we can't give you the list. The list is classified. Well, how will we know who they are? Well, they're really bad people, so you'll recognize them. I mean, it was like a skit from Saturday Night Live. If I had not participated, I wouldn't have understood. But I think it speaks to the question about that planning, the disaster planning, the ability to respond in an emergency, and thinking through all the various scenarios and how we're going to address those and who we can enlist to help us do that. Because as governors, we were all in. We were ready to be helpful in every way we could. And we didn't get the information we needed to be as effective as we could have been.
So you have put so many things on the table that I want to follow up about. We talked a little about building legislation at the outset, about the complexity of the budget process, about disaster response, huge events, 9/11, COVID, January 6th. So many things to follow up on. I do, to underscore the senator's point, I might have to tell a story that will get me fired, because I was I landed at DHS as a young person starting out, as it was starting out as a department.
Of course, that happened after 9/11.
Yes, and so the first time that the new department was changing the threat level, increasing it, I think it was March 2023. The impossibly old 28-year-old press secretary asked 22-year-old me to go to the FEMA website to write a press release or a fact sheet on what Americans could do to prepare themselves, so that we weren't sort of needlessly scaring people with a threat level. So I wrote some things from the FEMA website, and in there was duct tape and plastic sheeting in the event of a biological event. And those of us above a certain age remember that became sort of a thing on the late night shows for a while. But to prove your point, we were in a completely new environment, and reorganizing and learning as we went along about how to prepare.
All of those issues are perfect examples of why it's so important to have the transition go smoothly and have bipartisan cooperation and to have the outgoing and incoming administration working seamlessly and sharing information, because in many cases, it's not just the operations of the government. It's not just politics or what it is that the differences of agreement on policy. It's about life and death in many cases. And that's what COVID was about. During that crisis, when 9/11 happened, these are times when Americans had to come together. It didn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat. January 6th, I can tell you, was, one of a kind in that, we talking about the importance of states working together with the federal government. Before that, about a week early, we called in all the top federal law enforcement agencies into Annapolis, along with our superintendent of state police and our adjutant general, National Guard, all of our security folks, and talking about the increased traffic that we saw with threat levels and all the chatter that was going on. And we were sort of told they were concerned, but not really concerned. And I was saying, well, we're going to be prepared one way or the other because we surround the nation's capital. And so I can tell you, on January 6th, our team was ready. I was in the State House in Annapolis on a Zoom with the Japanese ambassador when my chief of staff leaned over to me. It reminded me of 9/11 when Andy Card leaned over to George W. Bush when he's reading to the kids, said the Capitol's under attack. I immediately excused myself. I called our entire security team immediately, superintendent, state police, adjutant general, Homeland Security, our whole team. I activated and sent the rapid response team, 250 trained Maryland State troopers to the Capitol. I activated the Maryland National Guard. While this is going on, I got desperate pleas, calls to my personal cell phone, Steny Hoyer, who's a Marylander, leader in the House, saying, Governor, the Capitol's been overrun. The Capitol Police are overwhelmed and we need your help. Please send help. There's nobody here. And so here's the next door governor helping the federal government to carry out the peaceful transition of power, something we never would have imagined could happen. So I said, Congressman, this Maryland State Police are already there on the way, should be there any moment. Already activated the Guard, but I can't send. It's the only place in America I can't send the National Guard because there's no governor. I have to get the approval of the Secretary of Defense. If Virginia needed help, I would send them, or Pennsylvania, wherever. Couldn't send them into DC. So we were amassing troops on the border of DC, waiting for 2.5 hours to get the approval of the Secretary of Defense. And then finally, so Maryland was the first police outside of the district to show up. We were the first National Guard outside to show up. But it shouldn't, that's an extreme example of a transition between outgoing president and incoming president, that a state government next door has to basically send troops to ensure that it happens peacefully.
And that's something that was really noted, Governor, and very much appreciated by members of Congress, that Maryland responded when we couldn't get DC to respond, because again, they couldn't send their Guard because they had to have approval from the Department of Defense, and we couldn't get the acting Secretary of Defense to provide the approval. So, and
by the way, I never got the approval of the Secretary of Defense. I kept saying, can't I just send them anyway? And they're like, no, Governor, you can't send them. You can't send your troops into DC. But 2.5 hours later, I got a call I got the cell phone rings. I don't recognize the number. I normally wouldn't answer it, but since I'm getting called from the leaders of Congress every 5 minutes, I figure I'll take it. It's a Virginia area code number, 703. And the guy says, Governor, this is Ryan McCarthy. I'm the acting Secretary of the Army. Can you please send the National Guard? And I said, well, Mr. Secretary, I've been trying to do that for 2.5 hours, so consider it done. We sent them immediately. But I don't think the Secretary of Defense ever did approve it. I was like, it's good enough for me. I'm sending them.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Ryan McCarthy is an impressive person who's worked across administrations to support continuity of knowledge and expertise. So I want to take your point about kind of urgent calls with the Secretary of Defense and kind of broaden it back to disaster response in general, because one thing that we heard from so many people in the last talking to the state and local associations, people in cabinet departments, that so much of the interaction is at the cabinet level. We think about White House intergovernmental affairs being the center and the focus, but that governors, mayors are working with cabinet departments every day. And So there's an aspect of that is about emergency response, but there's also your daily priorities, maybe environmental protections and land management issues with the Department of Interior. So can you talk about how did this work for you as governors to try to coordinate sort of your activities across a complex federal government? And did you have to work hard to get consensus across federal agencies? When did you find you had to go to the White House? Or was it just issue-based? You were hitting whoever you needed to get the answer you needed?
Well, I think it's all of the above. So in some cases there were, I can remember we had an issue around housing, homelessness when I was governor, and I called the Secretary of HUD, who I thought would be very supportive, who I got nowhere with. And so then I called the White House and the intergovernmental office, and they were really helpful in moving the bureaucracy. During the Trump administration, we've had real challenges around the opioid epidemic in New Hampshire, and trying to get funding to help with that. And the White House office, the ONDCP that was in the White House, was very responsive to recognizing we had a real challenge in New Hampshire, and they wanted us to help figure out how to make sure that those states who are hardest hit were able to get a higher percentage of the funding, even though we might be smaller states. So they were great. Talked to SAMHSA at Health and Human Services. They were not responsive at all. They just didn't seem to get it. So I have, my view is you call everybody everywhere and see who can help you move whatever the issue is.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think in emergency situations, usually it's easier because, everybody is focused on the emergency. If there's a hurricane or a flood or some type of a natural disaster, or, everybody's in a high alert and the people are ready to jump into action. It's the day-to-day functioning that sometimes gets a little, off track during transition. So we really didn't need to deal with the White House unless we needed to deal with the White House. Like we would, if I had to talk to the president or vice president, which was rare occurrences, or somebody at that level, only if we couldn't get help from the agencies. But I personally was talking to cabinet secretaries. Our staff was dealing with cabinet agencies on a daily basis practically, and we have matching state agencies for most things. Our Secretary of Transportation is talking to the Secretary of Transportation. Our Secretary of Labor is talking to the Secretary of Labor. Our Secretary of Commerce is talking to the Secretary of Commerce. And typically that's pretty professional. They might not always agree. They might not get the right answer. They might be a little frustrated with the lag timeframes, or can't get done fast enough, or not getting the answer they want. There's pretty good communication across all of the administrations. I said I was governor during the Obama administration, the Trump administration, and the Biden administration. There's individuals in different departments that were not good, and then there's other ones that were pretty good. It didn't matter what kind of crazy politics was going on. They were still doing their jobs every day, and we needed them to.
So you're being very good, Governor, about coming back to transition all the time. So I'm going to do the same and talk and kind of
That's what we were supposed to talk about.
Yes,
we could go off track if you want.
I mean, there's just like, you've put so many interesting things on the table. So I do want to go back a little bit to the early days of an administration. New president has made campaign promises, needs to enact them. We didn't get into a lot of details about how to build a legislative package to make that happen. I think you talked about the governor's perspective. I'd be interested to ask Senator Shaheen about what you've seen work well from a new administration trying to build consensus around a big national idea.
Well, as I said, I think it's fair to say that most members of Congress always feel like we're not consulted enough.
Most governors feel that way too.
That's right.
So I think, again, it's the same basics that we've already talked about. So on the bipartisan infrastructure package, it was helpful to have the governors to lay out a blueprint. It was helpful to have had President Biden have said, and the previous administration have said, this is a priority. We need an infrastructure investment in this country. But what really helped move the ball was there were 10 of us who got together and said, we got to be able to get this done across the aisle, 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans. And we then called the White House and said, you know, help us figure out how to do this. We talked to the leadership, both Democrat and Republican in the Senate, and they both sort of gave us their blessing to keep working. And I think what was really important was that constant communication and the effort to figure out what the parameters were for something that could actually get the votes. And I think one of the really important things for any administration is to help to identify what they want to accomplish. I mean, this is pretty basic and part of the transition report. Figure out what they want to accomplish, and then reach out to everybody and let them know that. It's the communication that is really helpful, and to do it in a bipartisan way so that everybody feels like they've been engaged on the issue.
Yeah, I think it's the same sort of process at the state level. You know, we come in, a new governor comes into office, and I mean, it's a really turbulent time, right? You just wrapped up a campaign in November. Usually you're sworn in January, so there's a couple of months of transition. You're winding down the campaign office. You're putting together an entire cabinet, your whole staff, thousands of people. You have to put together a budget. You have to put together a legislative package, all within that 90-day period. Meanwhile, you're moving into an executive mansion, usually a governor's mansion, out of your house. You're like trying to get people to accept positions. They get the position. They don't really know what their job is yet. I mean, and this is going on at the federal and state level. It's a lot to do it at the same time. You got to go give an inaugural speech, a state of the state speech, all of this at the same time. And it's all brand new people. In my case, you know, I'm only the second Republican to be reelected in Maryland in the entire 246-year history of the state. So there weren't a lot of Republicans around state government. They didn't really want me being there. And so we had to figure out how to get bipartisan cooperation and find a way to reach across the aisle with the entire, every single elected official was a different party at the state level. Only a handful in the legislature were of the same party. And we had a very successful first year. And you know, had a few other things thrown in the middle of it. 89 days in, we had the riots in Baltimore, and 6 days later, I got life-threatening cancer. So it could be a turbulent time.
Yes, very much. Well, and one of the challenges we had in New Hampshire, it's gotten a little better since I was governor, but the governor inherits the cabinet. So in New Hampshire, because we only have a 2-year term for governor, the commissioners serve for designated terms. Most of them serve for 4 years. Some of them are 6 years. And so you inherit all these people who don't necessarily support you, and then try and figure out how to make decisions in that circumstance. So as you say, there are lots of things that you're not expecting when you get elected. The one thing I want to go back to, though, is something that Max raised in his opening comments, and that is the challenge of getting people confirmed right now at the federal level, which is really out of control. And there are a number of things that I think need to happen. One is we've got to stop allowing blanket holds on people who have been nominated. Not only do we need to look at whether the Senate needs to confirm such a broad range of people as currently we do, but then I think we need to change the rules around holds. It's not tenable that we have 300 general officers on hold for our military because one person has an issue with the Department of Defense. It's not tenable that we have ambassadors that are being held up all around the world because there's one individual who has a problem that's often not related to the people who they're holding. It's totally unrelated. And the American people look at that and they say, that doesn't make sense. Why are we allowing that? We should not be allowing that. That needs to change. We've got to do something about that because it's affecting our ability to operate. When we don't have ambassadors on the ground in places like where we've got a conflict not like Nagorno-Karabakh in the Middle East, and the Chinese do and the Russians do, how do we then stay competitive on the world stage? It is a huge problem, and it's something that we need to speak out about a lot louder. The average person needs to start speaking out about this, because we can't allow this to continue to go on.
I agree with you, Senator, 100%. I wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal last week, hammering the senators that are holding up all of these hundreds of appointments. Outrageous way to run a government. And you can argue about whatever, passionately debate issues that you disagree on, but to hold people hostage because you don't get your way is absurd, and it's got to stop. And I mean, there's one particular senator that's holding up all the military appointments, but there's people on both sides of the aisle doing it. I know that Senator Sanders was holding up health appointments because he didn't get what he wanted. It really should stop. I mean, I mentioned I'm in a state that's 70% Democrats in the legislature. I'm this guy that wasn't even supposed to be there, but we got 7,000 appointments confirmed through the Senate of Maryland, and I don't think I ever had a single rejection. So that even though they didn't really, they knew that we had to put people in positions to run the government, or people weren't going to get the services that they needed.
Well, and again, this is a problem that the Senate has, but this is also about citizens in this country weighing in with our government. This will only go on as long as we as citizens allow it. And it's time that we said enough already. The people of Alabama need to tell Senator Tuberville, he's made his point, stop it. He's affecting national security. The people in the states who are affected need to weigh in with their elected officials, and they need to weigh in with their, what I always say to people in New Hampshire is, don't just call the congressional delegation, call your state legislature, call the governor's office, call everybody who's in public office and tell them this is not acceptable, because, our democracy only works as well as the people who participate in it.
And I'm always trying to bring it back to transition, as you pointed out. I mean, this is a terrible situation now in the middle of an administration, but imagine if we're changing administrations and one senator wants to hold up all of the cabinet secretaries and all of the appointments for the new administration that need confirmation. The new administration can't take over. It's absurd.
Yeah, just vote against them if you don't like them, but don't stop government from operating.
We have a lot of people in this room who would like to follow up with you about making these ideas a reality. We talk a lot here about the challenges that vacancies pose. One, it's not a way to attract talented people into government, to ask them to put their lives on hold for months at a time. And then you have capable people in federal agencies in acting positions, but they're serving 2 or 3 jobs at a time. And and we hear that it is not good for morale or long-term planning to have impermanent and constantly changing leadership.
Well, it's a terrible, I mean, you're trying to attract the best and brightest, and they're in some other job, and you say, I'd like you to be the secretary of such and such, or I want to promote you to be on the Joint Chiefs. And they're like, I'm not going through that. I don't want to be dragged through the mud. I don't want to be held up for a year. I can't leave my current job. It's we're in a mess.
And as you said, this should be a concern for future presidents of either party, because our analyses show that the trend is getting worse over time. It is taking longer and longer. And it's also taking more of the Senate's time. We absolutely came out with an analysis of that.
When we should be focused on what's important to the people of this country, to have to be spending all this time bickering over nominees. As I said, if you don't like them, vote against them, but don't hold everybody up.
That's bipartisan agreement here.
Yes, right.
All right. So speaking of bipartisan agreement and votes, I understand we have to get the senator out of here promptly at 10:15 for a vote. So it is time for me to open it up for questions from the room. Austin has a microphone. Yes.
Should I stand or is it? Sure. Okay. Hi, I'm Jasmine Carr. I had a question for both the Senator Shaheen and Governor Hogan. Both of you stated that in prior political periods, it was very hard, and in some cases, it was almost impossible for the both of you to collaborate with others in Congress, the executive branch, and sometimes in the state and local areas, including tribal lands. And my question to the both of you is, how did you guys motivate yourselves to keep reaching across the aisle and working with others who are very different from you politically, just going through like so much defeat and just, still pushing yourselves to do that?
Sure. I'd love to tackle that one. I've mentioned a couple times, I'm a Republican in we're the bluest state in America. Most people don't realize that, but I knew that I could not get anything done in my state. I couldn't really represent the people who elected me unless I was willing to work across the aisle. And in my very first inaugural, it's how I ran a campaign. It wasn't really a partisan campaign, was focused on issues that people agreed with across the board. We were going to turn our economy around and put people back to work. And I said it wasn't about Republicans and Democrats. It was about, the future of our state. And we ran a campaign that way. Is how I was able to win. In my inauguration, I said, this is not the beginning of divided government. It's the start of a new era of bipartisan cooperation. And we sat down with the Democratic leaders. We didn't always agree. In fact, sometimes we passionately disagreed on things, but we tried to find that middle ground where we could all stand together, because that's what the people elected us to do, to solve problems and fix things and get things done. And so we had tremendous success. We didn't win every argument. It wasn't without some acrimony or disagreement, but I always thought, I really focused on you could disagree without being disagreeable. You can have a difference of opinion on an issue without questioning someone's integrity or their patriotism or, where they were coming from. And so I didn't care if it was a Democratic idea or a Republican idea, if it was a good idea. And we reached tremendous compromises on turning our economy around, on cutting taxes, on growing jobs, on lowering the cost of healthcare, on cleaning up the Chesapeake Bay, on record funding education and making improvements. And we took the Republican ideas and the Democratic ideas, and it turns out it's really what most people want, because I left office after 8 years with over 70% approval of every single demographic: Democrats, independents, Republicans, Black, white, young, and old. So I don't think there's anyone else that can do that. A couple of governors have, like Charlie Baker in Massachusetts, Phil Scott in Vermont. These are Republicans who did the same thing. We're different guys, but all of us, by necessity, had to work together with Democrats as opposed to just demonizing them. We had to persuade them instead of just calling people names. And so I'm really fed up with the politics, the divisiveness, the dysfunction. And, I think I don't believe in performative politics, which we sometimes see, not from this senator, but from some people in Congress. And I'm more of a get to work and get things done, roll up your sleeves, and I'll work with anyone. That's what we're supposed to do.
Yeah, and I'm sorry if I left the impression that I thought it was impossible to get things done, because I think if you decide you're going to be able to find ways to work together, you figure out what you can agree on and how to do that. I had a legislature, all 3 terms I was governor, that was Republican. And we also have something in New Hampshire called the Executive Council, which is a 5-member elected body that approves all gubernatorial appointments and all contracts. At the time I was governor, over $5,000 for the state. So imagine dealing with that. And we were able to get things done because we worked together. But one of the things that I do think it's important to raise a concern about is that things are getting more partisan, and they're getting more partisan in Congress. I was very disappointed to see Mitt Romney leave, because he's been one of those people who is like Governor Hogan, who's been willing to work across the aisle. And
he was one of the 10 you were referencing earlier.
That's right, who helped get the bipartisan infrastructure package done. And more, the parties are making it a negative for somebody to work across the aisle, for somebody to compromise. And that's on steroids when it comes to the House. I think one of the worst things that's happened is the Hastert rule that said, oh, I'm not going to pass legislation unless I only have Republicans who pass it. the whole time I was in the legislature in New Hampshire in the state Senate, and it's true in the US Senate, the only way we get things done is by people working across the aisle and getting a bipartisan vote on things. And I think if the speaker would say to those extreme Freedom Caucus, I don't care what you say, I'm going to partner with the Democrats and we're going to get the budget done. We're going to get the continuing resolution passed. We're going to get done what we need to get done for the country. If he took the approach that Governor Hogan has taken, I think we'd all be a lot better off, and I think he would be applauded.
See, Will.
Hi, thank you both for being here this morning, and thank you for your service. I was hoping you talked a bit.
Tell us who you
Oh,
are.
sorry, my name is Will McClellan, formerly of the Partnership for Public Service. You talked a bit about this when you were both talking about disasters, but I was wondering if you could expand a little bit on the role of time when it comes to cooperation between the federal government and state and local governments. I think when you're elected on an agenda, when you run for governor, you have a bit more time to deal with the issues that you run on, but in a crisis like a disaster, your time is a lot more limited, and the time of the federal government is also a lot more limited. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how you manage your time during disasters and how that can affect cooperation between state and federal government.
Sure, it's a great question, and it's really important. And so we dealt with a lot of crises that it's a totally different time frame, right? You have to gather all the information quickly, make the quick decisions. It's not a long, you can't go through a long process, but you also can't make bad decisions. So we dealt with everything. We had major flooding events, we had hurricane events, massive snowstorms, we had riots, we had COVID. All of those were outside the normal process, right? And we had to, in some cases, make instant decisions that were really hard. And sometimes either decision could be bad. But the way I handled it was I surrounded myself with the very best people, which going back to transition again, which I like to do. It's very important that you build your team quickly and that you have trust in the team and that you have really good people in place. And I shared this advice with the new incoming governor of Maryland, Wes Moore, when I was leaving. I said, make sure your security team, your Homeland Security folks, your state police, your National Guard, your cyber folks that are, we have serious threats going on. Keep our guys until you get somebody, if you want to change, but do not leave those positions unfilled, because we face these threats. The people that have to deal with transportation, you got to deal with, major storms and whatnot. So yeah, I think it's building a great team, getting all the information, making fast decisions, and then communicating why. Here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, and here's what it means. And that's what I try to do in each one of those crises.
One of the first crises I faced was a deranged individual who shot 2 state troopers, a judge, and a newspaper editor in northern New Hampshire in a little town called Colebrook. And for a number of hours, this happened in the morning and all afternoon, we didn't know where he was. And we had enlisted the Canadians, RCMPs, Fish and Game from New Hampshire, our state police, Vermont and Maine troopers were all involved in the firefight that finally took him down. But it was really because that had never happened at the state level before. It was hard to figure out exactly what to do. I had people who were saying to me, no, you got to go up to Colebrook right away, go up. I said, well, no, I don't want to get in the way of those people on the ground. And as the governor said, having faith in my safety commissioner and the state police and the attorney general, who all said, we're going to go up. We're watching, Governor, you stay where you are right now until we know what's happening with him. But I remember one of the things that I really appreciated was President Clinton called me at the time, and he had a similar incident with state troopers in Arkansas. And one of the pieces of advice he gave me was, he said, I stay in touch with those people who have lost their loved one, because they really need that support and they will really appreciate that. And I went to every service, obviously, but stayed in touch with, and still stay in touch with the people who were affected. And there is a bond there that you get having gone through that experience together.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's, you have to be the commander in chief, but you also have to be the consoler in chief. And so I can't tell you how many funerals I went to for police officers and firefighters and soldiers and National Guardsmen and people, that I just came across throughout. And it means a lot for you to be there and remember.
It does. And, it's
Right.
it's one of the things that I didn't expect and hadn't thought about in advance when I got elected governor. I mean, I'd been in the state Senate, I'd been involved in policy and politics for many years, but I didn't think about the extent to which you are consoler in chief. After 9/11, being there at services, making sure that I talked to people who were affected. Whenever there was a crisis, it's something that people really care about. And it's something that it's really important for leaders to do.
This is a powerful note. I want to end on a slightly lighter note. Will kind of reminds me to ask, I didn't mention Senator Shaheen's time leading the Harvard Institute of Politics and everything that those institutions do to inspire young people to the values and skills needed for public service. What advice would you give to young people interested in public service?
Oh, I used to get this question a lot. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. And what I always said to people is, think about where you want to live and what you care about, and go there and get involved in your community. Don't think about, I want to be in Congress, or I want to be in the Senate, or I want to be president. Think about where you want to be and get involved in the way that is important to you to make a difference in your community. And from there, you can do whatever you want as the result. But we have thousands of elected positions that go unfilled every year for school board members and city council races and in New Hampshire library trustees and budget people. And going to your community and making a difference there is the best way to figure out, first, if you really like policy and want to continue to be involved, but also to get known and to find people who you will work with. I still today have people who have helped me on my campaigns. I'm sure you do too, who I met when I was organizing the Somersworth International Children's Festival in a community near where I live. So people who I worked with on the zoning board. Those are the relationships that will stay with you for the rest of your life.
I think it's critically important. I mean, the only thing that makes me hopeful about the future is the young people that I talk to about, they are going to be able to fix some of these issues and problems that we probably can't fix that quickly. And I did a thing yesterday at the Ronald Reagan Foundation and Institute with young people who, encouraging them to get involved at the local level or to get involved in public service, because unfortunately, a lot of young people today are really turned off to politics and public service, and we've got to get them interested because we need them to continue to fix these things. I am going to try to follow in your footsteps a little bit. Next month I'm going to be a visiting fellow at the Harvard School of Politics, along with the School of Public Health. I'm going to do two at the same time. We would talk about our COVID response. I'm doing similar kinds of things at the University of Chicago, Columbia University, American University, Rutgers, and a couple of others, because I really do. I'm basically unemployed now, so I'm going to go around and try to encourage young people to go into public service. And I started really young in politics. My dad was in Congress back in the 70s. I started, in campaigns, stuffing envelopes and putting up signs at like 10 or 12 years old, but also was, teenage Republicans and college Republicans. And I was chairman of Youth for Reagan. And at like 21, I was on the Reagan transition team. So young people can get involved at any level. And I started a petition drive as a kid to get 10,000 signatures to change the county government charter. So there's, people can start at any age, and we need them to.
So that is a good note to end on. I do want to thank again the fabulous team at Deloitte that was such an amazing partner in putting this together. Heidi Green, Mike Beelan, David Mader, Mary Margaret Jenkins, Michelle Solomon, George Varakis, the Partnership for Public Service team that that really pulled together a lot of administration officials to talk to. Chantel Wren, who did heroic work on this project, Sasha Blockman, Will McClellan, Cassidy Lee, Paul Hitlin, and Sarah Philbrick, Austin Laufersweiler, who makes events look easy. I want to thank the really impressive people from the last 4 administrations who contributed their insights to this project. And I especially want to thank Governor Hogan and Senator Shaheen for being here with us today, spending your time to talk to us about these issues. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. very much.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have to do it again.
Yeah. The 2 of us should do a traveling
That's right.
show about working together.
Across the aisle.
Get another mixer. No, I just said we should take it on the road. I didn't know we can go too far off track. Thank you very much, Governor. I'm a citizen of yours. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. Where do you live? Bethesda. Thank you. We got the senator out in time to vote.
Yeah,
Right.
good.
Thank you, Senator Jeanne.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for doing all the hard